Is Path of Exile 2 Dawn of the Hunt the worst patch ever? I think it probably is. I was going to make this video a couple of days ago, but I'm glad I didn't. Because a couple of days ago, I was extremely frustrated. I've had the worst league start ever. I've actually re-rolled characters. Now the developers GGG have stepped in and started to make some quite drastic changes. On the second day, they reduced monster life by 25%. And then today, further, they reduced monsters' minion life by about 300%. So how did this all happen? Well, it looks like the developers wanted to get more meaningful combat, and for them, more meaningful combat means fights that last longer. So as a result, they nerfed player power, and it looks like increased monster life. I don't see anywhere in the patch notes where they increased monster life, so these were done really stealthy. That said, the patch notes didn't give a lot of transparency at all, because even the nerfs didn't have magnitudes on them. And I think that's part of the problem. Because the patch notes didn't come out with any level of detail, no one could design any kind of build to actually start with, so we're all winging it as we went. I know for certain my first build was suboptimal. With the monsters really soaking up so much damage, you had to go far more offensive than I like to go. So I started off really defensive and then couldn't do any damage to the mobs. It was taking like 30 seconds to kill a white mob in some cases. And 30 seconds on a white mob is not meaningful combat, it's just boring. The Act 2 boss, for instance, took me about 15 minutes to kill. That wasn't meaningful. It was just too long. By the end of it, I was bored senseless. You'd gone through all the moves in like the first maybe 5 minutes. What is the point in dragging it out to that extent? And I think they really missed the mark on this, because the problem with the initial launch is that the end game was far too easy and the monsters were too trivial. So nerf end game power for the really strong builds that were doing that. Don't just nerf everything. I tend to play off meta builds anyway, and so I never do that level of damage. But especially, why nerf the power in the campaign, which is also really slow, and you expect players to repeat this every 3 months, or actually even more than that. Now they have published what they're going to do to improve the situation. Some of it looks like they're completely out of touch. Like who needs more checkpoints? If you want meaningful combat, let us get to more bosses more quickly, and we'll get more meaningful combat. Don't add just loads of checkpoints because your maps are too big. I don't want to sound too negative because some of the game changes are good. I ran into a rogue Exile. It was actually decent fun. Now that was a meaningful fight. But I think the changes, along with how they expect you to level your character, are just too much. I'm going to talk a little bit about the design of the Huntress because I think it's bad. After that, I want to talk about what I think is the main problem with Path of Exile that have made all of this far worse than it would have been if this was a patch in Path of Exile 1. So, the Huntress. The Huntress is on the right side of the tree, so she doesn't have a great deal of early game defenses or life. So having her jump into combat frequently is extremely dangerous. And my god, parry is not the answer. One, you can't do it in normal mapping content. There are too many mobs, they all run faster than you. You just can't do it or you're going to get killed. Now, where I thought this was going to make a real difference is in bossing. But using it in bossing is so dangerous because attacks you would think you could parry, you can't. They just hit you. The other problem with parry is it feels like the character has been designed around having lower damage and getting most of that damage back through using something like parry where you get 50% increase, which is huge by the way. And this leads me to a big concern. It looks like the characters in Path of Exile 2 are being designed around having to do things in order to make their skills work with the combo system. What I think the risk is here is that you damage one of the best things about Path of Exile 1, which is the ability to get any character to use any skills. You can't do that if all your skills rely on other skills to actually feel strong. And more than most characters, the Huntress seems to really suffer from this. And being forced to make your skills strong by using something like parry and give you an extra 50% is just out of order. Especially when it's almost impossible to get to work. And yes, eventually you will learn which boss fights can be used with parry. But that makes all the ones that can't just feel bad. What I think actually exacerbated this problem to make the patch feel so woeful is that we do not have the ability to make ourselves stronger through making decent decisions. In fact, sometimes it's completely out of our hands because our whole ability to gear is based upon RNG. One of the reasons I had such a terrible league start was I couldn't drop any gear. I wasn't dropping any currency. I wasn't even dropping skill support gems. And then I go to the vendors for my savior and guess what? Another spear with fucking stun duration. It actually takes the piss. There is nothing you can do for bad luck in this game. You cannot craft your way out of it with the crafting bench. And yes, we got these socketing things, but where's your attributes? Where's things like flat physical? It's just super lacking. Not to mention, if you're having bad luck, you don't even have any sockets on your gear, or any things to put those sockets there. It just feels terrible, and as a player, there is nothing at all you can do to fix it. The crafting system in Path of Exile isn't developed enough to be capable of supporting you in the early game. Nor do I think they want you to be able to do it because they want drops to feel meaningful. The problem is when every drop is a miss, you just struggle like hell and there's nothing you can do. It's just so bad. They need to do something desperately to fix this. The other thing I really fear is that GGG do not have the level of trust that they have with the previous audience of POE 1, because there's a lot of new people here, and making patches like this could really put them off and they may never come back. And that's not good for any of us. I think a lot of these problems come from the fact that they were rushing this patch out to meet the deadline because they'd already delayed Path of Exile 1. They nerfed player power massively and didn't think about the impact of minions. Minions are still way too fast, they have way too many hit points even after the nerfs. You can tell it was rushed by the fact they didn't even have one of the ascendancies enabled properly. Plus, the unserializable object from server, that just shouldn't happen. There are so many ways to detect that and stop it from happening. Plus, the way they are doing launches is the way they've always done launches with Path of Exile 1, which is a new sort of thing to do. The problem is, that sort of takes away from the fact this is still early access. You should be developing it, not creating new mini-leagues. They do need to change this to more of a reactive development process. This league thing will not work. It's getting people to come back to a really bad situation in some cases. And I know it's kind of around their business model, but I just don't think it works for early access games. This video is not like the others I do, it is completely unscripted. Please let me know how this format works for you. And may your RNG be way better than mine. Good night.